After I dropped out of high school and moved out of my parents' house, I needed a job. I'd have done anything for rent money about that time in my life. So I'm lucky or unlucky, depending on how you look, that the local cemetery needed employees. I'm Jake, 19 years old, and at that point in my life, I was more interested in surviving than thriving. At first, the old-timers who had been working there for 20 or 30 years wondered why someone so young would ever want to be a gravedigger. It was hard work, really bad on the lower back, but I soon adjusted and it turned out to be something more akin to free gym membership than an actual job. I mean it, I got swole pretty fast. And if I'm honest, it only ever felt like work if the weather was bad or we had an actual funeral on site. Otherwise, it was just lovely to be able to spend time outdoors. So the way our cemetery was set up was pretty simple. Most of the grounds were just regular grave sites, all pretty much the same size and price. But the northwest corner of the grounds was a private site that contained much larger plots. These were reserved for much wealthier families, and the local undertaker made a lot of cash from selling extravagant grave setups to them. I'm talking whole mausoleum statues of angels and stuff like that. We hardly ever visited that site area except for cleaning and maintenance duties, which were never left to me. I didn't take it personally, but the older guys just didn't trust me with all the cleaning chemicals and whatnot that kept the marble and brass fixtures looking fresh. Which is why it was so weird when I got a call on one of my days off, asking me if I'd been up to that area recently. My boss was livid. I could hear it in his voice, and he pulled no punches when he asked me if I'd been screwing around on the northwest plots. Of course I told him no. The last time I'd been up there was to watch one of the old-timers using the marble cleaning chemical as part of my training, which had been months ago. He sighed and seemed confused and confounded, so I asked him what exactly the issue was. He replied that it could wait until the next time I was at work. I was worried, but I was sure that I hadn't done anything wrong. Not deliberately anyway, and especially nothing that involved the northwest plots. A couple days later, the atmosphere was incredibly tense when I rolled into work. I knew something fairly serious had happened. All I knew was that I wouldn't have to badger anyone to find out. The boss walked me out to the northwest plot, silent the whole way, and I knew better than to open my mouth until I found out exactly what was going on. There was already a worker up in the plot tending to one of the graves, and that's when my boss told me that if I'd been hanging around the area, maybe during my lunch break, eating a few snacks among the opulent grave sites, now would be the time to tell them. I swear to God that I hadn't, but I knew better than to eat stuff near the graves, as I'd been well informed that it attracts wild animals that in turn do damage to some of the resting places. And that's when he broke it down for me. He said something had tried to dig up one of the freshly dug graves out of the northwest plots. Something in particular, not someone, because we each had enough experience to recognize when a grave had been dug up by tools or by hand, or in this case, by claw. It was rough around the edges, with noticeable claw marks in the dirt instead of straight lines carved out by a shovel. This was something of an emergency, for obvious sanitary reasons, but for sentimental reasons too. If local families discovered that wild animals were trying to dig up their deceased relatives, there would be an uproar. Something had to be done, and quickly. A meeting was called among the gravediggers and attendants. As far as we knew, the mysterious digging had been taking place overnight. It was most likely undertaken by some kind of scavenger animal, a coyote, a black bear, maybe even an escaped dog. The solution was obvious. Night watchmen would have to be present in the cemetery every night until the situation was resolved. And guess who was told to be the night watchman for the first full week? You guessed it, the young guy, the new guy, me. The only thing that was even vaguely attractive was the fact that anyone doing the night work would be paid double the regular rate, and I could definitely have done with the extra cash. The first night of being on watch really sucked. All I had for company was a flask of strong coffee and a .22 pellet gun loaded to me by one of the other workers to take down any varmints. It was long, boring, and lonely, but it got easier once I adjusted my sleeping pattern. Then, on my second to last night of my watchman duties, I was on a little foot patrol, walking towards the northwest plot with a flashlight in my hand, and that's when I saw it, a flurry of frantic limbs digging at the earth. I could have shouted something, maybe even fired the .22 into the air to scare the animal away. But if I killed whatever critter was causing so much trouble, I might be out of the extra pay, but at least I'd have my daytime life back. I crept up slowly, turning the flashlight off and sneaking stealthily towards a dark shape, working away at the earth. I've hunted rabbits at night with my uncle before, so I figured I'd use the old flashlight technique to cause the animal to freeze for a second to take the killing shot. But when I did, when I aimed that powerful flashlight toward the digging thing, I almost cried out in fear. It wasn't an animal. It was a human crouched on all fours, digging away at the earth with his or her bare hands. I couldn't bring myself to aim the rifle. I was too shocked at what I was looking at. So all I did was start making as much noise as possible, telling them to get out of there, saying I'd call the cops if they didn't comply. They complied all right, but not out of fear. The look in that person's eyes was one of fury, pure anger that they'd been interrupted in their obscene little act. If I hadn't had that rifle with me, if I hadn't had the means to defend myself, that was obvious to them. I don't know if I'd be here today to tell the story. Needless to say, the other workers didn't believe me in what I saw. Some of them told me they didn't doubt that I'd seen something, but they disputed what the thing was. And I get that, I really do. But still, I don't know what I saw. The police struggled to determine anything other than a few footprints, but it didn't lead to anything else as that individual ran far into the tree line beyond what I could see. All I know is that it was definitely a person. Shopping at thrift stores is one of my favorite pastimes. I love looking for a great bargain on anything from clothes to furniture. I am proud that my apartment and wardrobe are mostly thrifted items. But the story that I am about to tell you is something of a lesson to me when it comes to thrifting. I run a small yet popular cafe that serves coffee, good food, and a place to study. I practically designed the entire interior and made it to a point to use various pieces of furniture, including old diner chairs and old art chairs from hotels. I enjoy what I do, and seeing customers appreciate the idea of reusing old furniture is even more satisfying. However, there is one thrifted armchair that most customers absolutely refuse to sit on, and I don't even know why. Some even tell me that they have had terrible accidents. Naturally, I didn't believe any of their stories. I couldn't imagine why they would think that a beautiful, thrifted armchair could be the cause of these mishaps. One customer told me that she sat in the armchair for almost an hour, and by the next morning had gotten into a terrible motorcycle accident. Another said that he sat in the armchair, and 3 weeks later, he lost everything in the biggest Ponzi scheme scandal to hit the city. And then some claimed to have seen an oddly dressed gentleman sitting in the armchair, looking at them before disappearing into thin air. I believed it was all pure coincidence, and that the armchair was just a harmless leather chair with nail-headed studs that I had thrifted from a hotel sale. I didn't think for 1 second that this was the cause of accidents or that strange vanishing man would sit in the chair and look at my customers. There is no way, whatsoever. Regardless of the stories, I brushed them aside and did my usual task of serving coffee and snacks to my customers. I was brewing coffee one afternoon, occasionally looking up toward the supposedly cursed chair. It stood in its usual place, and when I felt weird that someone was looking at me, I looked over my shoulder, and that's when I saw something odd. I saw a man sitting in the chair. I didn't notice or even see him walk inside, or maybe I was too busy with a customer that I somehow missed. I quickly walked over to him and asked him what he would like. When he didn't answer, I figured he wanted to take his time before deciding what to order. I then left him and went back to serving the other customers. After a few minutes or so, I decided to check back in with the man. I turned around, and to my surprise, the man was not there anymore. Where did he go? Did he just get tired and leave? Or was he called away for some business or errand? But I didn't hear or see the front door open, so where did he go? I must be letting those creepy, unreal stories get to me. I kept telling myself that nothing creepy was happening, nor was there a vanishing man sitting in the armchair. So, like before, I shrugged it off and returned to work. As the last customer left that night, I closed the cafe and went to the bus stop. I boarded the bus bound for my place. I sat in the window seat and waited for the bus to fill up. I looked at the cafe through the window and saw the armchair as clear as day. I felt groggy and yawned for a bit when I suddenly saw the man again. This time, I saw him sitting in my cafe's armchair. I couldn't believe it. What was the man doing inside my cafe? Did I see things? I rubbed my eyes once more as the bus began to drive away. I looked again, and I saw the man was gone once more. Now, I know I'm not crazy, but if I see the same person 2 times in a row, that must mean something, right? I needed some fresh air, so I got off a little early. I signaled for the driver to stop the bus just a few blocks away from the cafe. I got off and began to walk along the sidewalk while the bus drove away. I kept wondering why I was seeing this strange man, and the questions kept flooding into my head over and over. Just then, I heard a terrifying crashing sound, like something big had collided with something else. I saw people running past me towards the sound. Curious, I followed them, and once I made a turn, I stopped in my tracks and gasped in horror. The bus I had been riding earlier collided with a moving truck. Several of the passengers had gotten injured, and some even had broken bones. Luckily, no one died, but it got me thinking, if I hadn't seen that strange man sitting in the armchair inside of my closed cafe and opted to get down, I would have been in that crash and gotten injured as well, or worse. As much as I wanted to have that armchair, after seeing proof of what the customers were telling me, I didn't want to subject others to the same experiences I had. I decided to sell the armchair and got another set. I still have no idea why the chair made us experience these tragedies, or who the strange man was. Suffice to say, I was more careful when it came to buying thrifted items. I still can't explain it, but as far as I'm concerned, I wonder what could have happened if I sat in that chair and then boarded the bus. Just thinking about it scares me. Christmas marks the 5th anniversary of what happened at the cabin 5 years ago. It seems longer than that, to be honest, but maybe that's because I've been dwelling on the memory of it for so long. On the one hand, the incident inspired me to finally finish a new book, and I enjoyed a great deal of success. On the other hand, it still haunts me and gives me nightmares to this day. My plan to spend Christmas alone at the retreat was a last-minute decision. I had been putting it off for the past year, so unsurprisingly, all the cabins were fully booked. But I managed to arrange a short stay at a caravan about a mile from the cabin where I had previously stayed. Although I had some reservations about being out there again, it was the best way to overcome my writer's block. I had tried other retreats in the previous years, but nothing quite like that place. There was something about it. I felt drawn to it, and just after a few days of being back there, I found myself completely immersed and had just finished wrapping up the second chapter of my new book. The caravan wasn't quite as cozy or isolated as the cabin, and it didn't do a great job of keeping out the cold either. Anyway, I decided to take the rest of the day off, relax, and tune into the local radio station for a few hours before turning in for the night. I might have fallen asleep sooner had it not been for a strange announcement over the radio. There had been numerous reports of mysterious lights being sighted in the night sky. I wasn't a big believer in UFOs, but I was curious, and since the skylights of the caravan was completely covered in snow and I couldn't see all that much from the windows, I decided to step outside to see if I could get a glimpse of the strange lights for myself. Snowfall from the previous night had blanketed the entire area with a fresh coat of snow and ice, but I didn't let the chill distract me too much. But it wasn't long before my attention to the night sky was eventually drawn closer to the horizon, and that's when everything I had feared about returning to that place came true. It was the snowman, just as I remembered him. It wasn't too late to walk away. It meant being back at my noisy apartment with an unfinished book and, most importantly, no answers. Either way, why this place and why it was happening again? I was afraid, but still felt compelled to stay at the caravan. Things might be different this time around. Someone might have found out about my retreat, which was an elaborate hoax. It was at that moment I made a choice. I wouldn't let the snowman drive me away, not this time. I could finally put an end to the nightmares and the fear by facing up to it. After a few minutes of sitting at the table and collecting my thoughts, I peeked through the front window of the caravan. This time, it was just a regular snowman. Wishful thinking, I know, but I decided to do my best and just ignore it and try to get some sleep. I'm not sure how long it took me to drift off, but something suddenly woke me up from a deep sleep. I already knew that feeling, of course, the same feeling that I got when I was inside that cabin, except it seemed like more than something I was hearing. I felt it all around me. I'd kept the radio on, but now there was just static, and all I could hear was the cold storm outside. I wondered if it was just a dream, another nightmare. There wasn't a snowman outside, and I was just paranoid because I was back there. But then I opened the curtains. The snowman was still there and had moved closer. It was happening again, and I had no idea how to stop it. The best thing I could do was to ignore it, carry on as usual, and pretend it's not there. So I sat back at the table and began to work on my book. However, it wasn't long before I realized that ignoring the situation would be a lot more complex than I thought, as I acknowledged the sound of snowballs hitting the caravan, which eventually escalated to small stones being thrown at the windows. It was obvious that the snowman didn't like being ignored. So once again, I approached the window and opened the curtains. But instead of the usual reaction, I found myself somewhat confused at what I saw. The snowman was missing a face, perhaps now facing in the opposite direction. Either way, it hadn't happened before, and I felt I was in for a long night. After another stretch of deep sleep, I woke up again. I wasn't sure exactly what caused me to wake up so suddenly, but it was intense. Then I noticed something strange. The skylight was no longer covered in snow. Perhaps it was the wind, but I'd never seen the sky through it before. Then I felt a cold chill, followed by something that genuinely scared me. The caravan door was open. Initially, I thought I'd been robbed, but my belongings were still there. But some things definitely seemed out of place, and I no longer felt safe inside the caravan. As I went to close the door, I couldn't help but sense that there was something unusual about the landscape, but it was hard to tell due to the heavy snowfall. It took me a while to work up the courage to open the curtains again, but with the benefit of hindsight, I braced myself for the worst. However, nothing could have prepared me for what I saw next. The snowman was gone, and for the first time that night, I experienced relief, albeit a hint of anxiety, of not knowing where the snowman was or if he was still out there. I was still shaken up due to the apparent break-in, and took the mere notion that the snowman was gone as an opportunity to leave the caravan and check into the nearby resort, which was only about a 10-minute walk away. However, after packing my things and stepping outside, the events of that night took a sinister turn. The resort was gone. There was no sign of anything on the horizon, not even the soft glow of distant lights. And that's when I realized the true gravity of what had happened. The caravan had been moved somehow, without leaving any trace. I had no idea where or how far away I was from the resort. All I could see was a bland white landscape in every direction, and with the prospect of getting lost and freezing in the snow, I willfully returned to the caravan. It's been 3 days since I last saw the snowman, and as reassuring as that is, supplies are running low, and I have just enough gas to keep me going for a bit longer. Still trying to fathom how the caravan was moved and done without leaving any tracks in the snow. I pondered over the possibility that I may never escape this place. I hope this story will help raise awareness of the hidden perils that lurk beyond the inherent dangers of being out there in the snow. It's not always the cold that gets us. There might be something hiding in plain sight, because wherever there's snow, there can always be a snowman.